So I've gone for about 10 minutes here, and
180 now.
180. What's the pressure?
Pressure, and this is Air Force flying into that.
Yeah, this is Adam Berg. He's giving me this
pressure
information.
is now down to 896.
Oh my Jesus Christ. Okay. All right, I'm going to hold it together here.
That's meteorologist John Morales. For those of us down here in South Florida, we know him well. We love him immensely because he brings his true, authentic self every single time. He also has training and experience, a breadth of knowledge that is unmatched. And he's here to have a very serious conversation about the fact that these extreme weather events, they're coming for you. They're coming for all of us. Mother Nature is not going to pick and choose. And climate change is real. And the conversation you're about to listen to is sobering. Because if we do not acknowledge the power and the import, the substance of climate change, we're in for it in a really bad way. Take a listen. And joining me now, when I use the word privilege, I can't even begin to underscore. It's, you know what, John, it's an honor. It is an honor to be able to spend some time with the amazing John Morales. John, you and I were talking before we just hit record on this. You've been a meteorologist for 41 years. You went into broadcast news. Oh, is it longer now?
No, it's 41 years. It's just I'm just like, oh my God, I'm old.
No, not at all. You are seasoned. I like to say you are seasoned.
You. Yes, good.
You went into broadcast news in 1991, for which we are incredibly grateful. The millions of people that have been beneficiaries of your wisdom and your experience. In 2009, you became the chief meteorologist at NBC6, which for me as a South Floridian is very near and dear to my heart. And you and I were joking, you quote, retired, and yet I don't think retirement is a part of your vocabulary because you remain the hurricane specialist for NBC6, the local NBC affiliate, but you're also spreading your brilliance nationally and internationally. And also you've become a little bit of a viral sensation all of the time on social media. So welcome to the revolution on digital media. And John Morales, welcome to the Katie Phang News Channel. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you as well. So honored to be here.
Well, John, let's start with some very kind of gut check kind of moments, I think, that are important. Hurricane Melissa may have now come and gone from people's memories, but for those of us that live here in Florida and the Caribbean, hurricane season has not only now stretched out and become longer, but it is something that we look at with great trepidation and fear every year. Hurricane Melissa, though, was a remarkable storm, a Category 5. Just a point of personal privilege, I lost my home in 1992, courtesy of a Cat 5 called Hurricane Andrew. I was in my home when Andrew hit. I lived southern Miami-Dade County. I actually would say that a Cat 5 Hurricane Andrew is not a Cat 5 Hurricane Melissa. The storms have gotten stronger. Melissa killed 32 in Jamaica, 43 in Haiti. Those are just the latest stats, and pretty much erased off the map certain areas of Jamaica. John, what's going on? Because I'm not a meteorologist, but I think these storms are just incredibly stronger than what I knew about them when I was growing up.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a significant increase in the number of Category 4 and 5 hurricanes, or typhoons or cyclones, whatever you want to call them, depending on what part of the world you're in. And this is peer-reviewed science, right? So and this is notable as well, obviously, in the Atlantic, where just, by memory, we can all realize that we're definitely seeing a lot more of these of late. We've changed the speed limit on hurricanes. The thermodynamics, the physics have changed because of the hotter sea surface temperatures and, importantly, the ocean heat content, which is not just, how hot is it at the surface of the ocean, or in the case of Melissa, the Caribbean Sea, but how deep is that warm water? Because if Melissa, like this storm did, sits in one place for a very long time, it starts to churn up colder waters from beneath. But if the water underneath, even deeper, is also superheated, then it just continues to fuel the storm. And that's why Melissa ended up being the strongest hurricane by both pressure and wind speed to ever make landfall in the Atlantic basin.
John, it seemed kind of late to me, though, right? I mean, you and I sit here together and we're hanging out on November 5th. I used to always think, hey, as soon as I hit, early November, quote unquote, we're safe. We're kind of through it. But Melissa just hit a week and some change ago, not even. It seemed late in the season for something like this.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing an expansion of when conditions are ripe for tropical storms and hurricanes. And while the Western Caribbean is certainly an area that has always been looked at late in the hurricane season for potential development, these ocean temperatures that we saw there were ranked in the top 3 all-time observed. A condition, by the way, made 500 to 900 times more likely due to climate change, according to attribution studies. And those other fast attribution studies have concluded that there's been anywhere from a 10 mile per hour increase in the wind speeds on Melissa to, I've seen other attribution studies that indicate an 18% increase, which would be an amount higher than 10 miles per hour in the wind speed that we saw with Melissa. So, the science is there. Things are changing. They're happening both earlier and later in the year because of those sea surface temperatures being the way they are. And we're also, should I add, seeing storms in places where they normally wouldn't. So, for example, this very same hurricane season, we had a brief subtropical storm named Karen that was the furthest north that a storm with tropical characteristics had ever developed. So it's expanding geographically, it's expanding temporally, and the reason is, again, the changes that we're seeing in the ocean heat content, and that is greatly driven by climate change.
You're using a phrase, attribution studies. For those of us that want to understand more, I like to say knowledge is power, and that's what I try to empower people with that tune into this channel. What do you mean by attribution studies? Yeah,
so there's a set of scientists in different universities, especially in Europe, that look at, they model the conditions for Melissa in the absence of anthropogenic global warming, in other words, human-caused global warming, versus the current conditions being observed right now. And they see what Melissa would have done in the absence of global warming and with global warming. And that's how they can determine these differences. Again, you're just changing the elements that define how strong a hurricane can get. And that's why we're seeing these changes in the wind speed. I should add, it's going to be interesting to see the post-analysis by expert meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center in Miami regarding Melissa, because there was an instantaneous wind speed measured at 252 miles per hour by a dropsonde released from the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. And I'll be curious to see if 185 is not the final say of how strong the hurricane was when it made landfall. I'm talking about 185 mile per hour sustained wind when it made landfall. It is possible that if it ends up on post-analysis being stronger, then it'll stand alone as the strongest ever. Right now, it's tied with the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 as the strongest to make landfall. But I suspect that it's going to end up being even stronger than that one.
For people that actually haven't gone through the experience of a hurricane, even a smaller one, I think people need to understand, John, it's not just the water. It's not the storm surge, which, especially for those of us in South Florida or those of us that live in coastal areas, the sea rise is a very real thing that is happening. But you just spoke about sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, perhaps with Hurricane Melissa. Just as a funny, personal anecdote, my late father was close friends with Herb Saffer, Dr. Saffer, who was the Saffer-Simpson scale, which has been used for gauging the speeds of hurricanes for strength. But I want people who are tuning in to understand it's not just the water, it's the wind. It's the wind with the water. I mean, it's a combination of things. It's localized tornadoes. It's this literal perfect storm of multiple meteorological events that happen that have this devastating impact on human life and property. For example, Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica caused damage to homes and key infrastructure being an important thing here, equivalent to roughly 28 to 32% of last year's gross domestic product for that country. So it's not just loss of life, it's loss of property. It's the inability to rebuild for many of these countries like Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas. I mean, it is a relentless thing where we are. And yet, for example, we also saw similar loss of life and damage in places like Alaska for Typhoon Halong. I mean, it's not just you have to live in some warm, area or climate to have to sustain this type of damage and personal loss.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I have a lot to say about where you just laid out there. First, let me state to anyone who's never lived through a major hurricane or is a major hurricane survivor, if you haven't been through that, you have no idea. I mean, you have no idea. You do, Katie.
Yeah.
But because hurricanes don't just take lives, and obviously the mission of the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service and us in media as their partners is to save lives. Yes. But they also ruin lives. They ruin lives. So you've mentioned folks in Cuba, the Bahamas, Jamaica especially, right? It's going to take not just weeks or months. It's not even going to take years. It could take a decade or two for Jamaica to recover. Western Jamaica specifically, the big population centers like Kingston were spared, but Western Jamaica was flattened by these hazards that you mentioned. The winds, which likely gusted well above 200 miles per hour, the coastal inundation from the storm surge, which flattened places like Black River. You've seen the videos from Black River.
In southwest Jamaica, Black River's gone, basically.
Right. The flash floods and the landslides in some of the mountainous terrain or wherever there's creeks or wherever there's rivers that cross through there. And while for Caribbean islands, the risk of tornadoes might be a little bit lower than it is for bigger locations like, say, Florida, where during Milton, there was an incredible tornado outbreak, which claimed lives, should I add. The bottom line is that, for Jamaica, this is, before Melissa and after Melissa type of event. This is the way that people will refer to this event for decades to come, probably for the rest of their lives. And just like Jamaica will have to say that, the same applies to the Northwestern Bahamas for Hurricane Dorian. The same applies to Houston for Hurricane Harvey. The same applies to many of the Leeward and Virgin Islands with Hurricane Irma, and so on and so forth. And all these names I've mentioned are relatively recent names. Didn't even throw Maria in there, but imagine what it means to Puerto Ricans like me, right?
That's right.
Great disaster that was
the rebuild or the lack thereof. Yeah.
That's right. And they're still trying to recover from that. In this century, we're seeing some of the effects of the changing climate resulting in more extreme weather, which you alluded to during your introduction to this question. And I have a slide that I often use during my presentations from Kerry Emanuel. He is a climate scientist at MIT that specializes in tropical cyclones. And he shows me on that slide how the return period of a hurricane like Maria to Puerto Rico in the 20th century climate is once every 200 years. You would get an event like that once every 200 years based on the climate that we all grew up with. Okay. In the present climate, that event's return period is once every 20 years. So I rhetorically ask, can a society even adapt and be resilient enough for hurricanes like Maria, Irma, Dorian, Harvey, and all these others returning every 20 years instead of every 200 years? I don't think that's possible. And I think that the blow to the GDP, societal impacts, health impacts, because let's not forget, there's also peer-reviewed science out there that indicates that morbidity and mortality spikes after major hurricanes in communities. And that lasts not just a few weeks or months, it lasts a decade and a half, in which you see the spike of increased morbidity and mortality. So it impacts your health. It impacts, maybe you suffer from this, maybe not, but there's a lot of people that are Hurricane Andrew survivors that to this day still have post-traumatic stress disorder. right? Because whenever they hear of a hurricane forming out there, they get palpitations. Because it makes them very nervous, because you never want to live through another hurricane like that again. And I'll pause here. I mean, you also open up the whole idea of all the other extremes that we're seeing beyond hurricanes, but I know I've gone on for a long time, so I'll give you a chance to.
No, in fact, it's the perfect segue, because I did want to talk to you about when you talk about the once in a blank, fill in the blank kind of events. Recently, tragically, that language, that phrase percolated to the top of our conversation because of what happened with the flash floods, for example, in Texas. In July, we had more than 100 dead, including 27 little girls. Our wonderful community partner, David Lawrence, lost 2 of his granddaughters at that camp. 27 little girls and camp counselors when the Guadalupe River surged 26 feet in just 45 minutes. And I was so upset when I heard naysayers say, oh, it's just what happens with, Texas and you're on the river. And I'm like, no. Yale Climate Connections had a fantastic piece that they put out in August that said that this 1 in 100-year flood, as they might have defined it before, has now become more like 1 in 50 years or 1 in even 10 years, with economic damage being between 18 billion and 22 billion. I mean, John, these are the things that I think, sadly, people don't understand. The inextricably intertwined moment is these events are tied to climate change. This is not some bunk science. This is not some voodoo science. This is actual established science that is being researched, but tragically now being researched more in Europe and in other countries than it is in the United States.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, a 1 in 100-year event, these statistics, right? Which, by the way, we can frame it a different way. A 1 in 100-year event means that there's a 1% of that event happening in any given year. Right? 1 in 100, 1%. But that's based on our previous climate. That's based on our 20th century climate. In the present climate, the reason you see these 1 in 100, 1 in 500, 1 in 1,000-year events happening every couple of months, right, is because today's climate is not the climate by which these statistics were calculated. And extreme weather is multiplying and becoming more severe. In the case of flash floods, yes, a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor, and when it rains harder. The rate of precipitation, right, which is directly tied to the whole hydrology of, okay, how much rainfall runoff can a particular creek hold or channel during a certain amount of time, right? Start thinking about all the repercussions when you increase the rate of rainfall. What that leads to, in terms of what you mentioned, the rise in water in just 45 minutes, which was off the charts for them, right? But listen, I mean, let's think of the urban floods in New York City that happened just recently. And granted,
That was, it was just like last week. Yeah, that was outrageous.
Exactly. So, I mean, New York City is a very flood-prone place. It's fill on previous marshland, wetlands that were filled. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why New York City is flood-prone. But their entire system for dealing with rainfall runoff is designed based on conditions 100 years ago, when all those drains and sewers and whatnot were designed. Today's climate is not like it was 100 years ago. I don't care if you're skeptical about the human influence on this, which, by the way, I mean, if you're scientists are skeptical, if you're a denier, though, that's problematic, right? Because the conclusion of the scientific method has led us to this finding, the finding that it is human caused. But regardless of what you think about that, the climate today is definitely different than it was 100 years ago. And in New York City, when it rains harder. And the infrastructure cannot handle the rain rates that we're seeing today. Add to that sea level rise, which also has, of course, a human-induced component to it. And New York City now is flooding with putrid waters, okay, which are claiming lives, but probably spreading disease as well. And I only expect those events, much like the Texas 4th of July events, to continue to multiply in the future.
John, I said at the beginning of this episode that you have kind of gained some viral status all the time now when you do appear on television and on media. I want to play, though, a really quick clip that I pulled from social that you recently stating kind of unapologetically why you have made it part of your mission to make sure that people understand the critical importance of where we find ourselves right now. So let's take a quick listen, and then I'll have some follow-up with you on the other side.
One of the reasons I've tried during all my years on TV here in South Florida, and now, it's up to 34 years now, I've tried to be non-alarmist, right, all these years. I've changed in the last 5 years or so just simply because I can no longer not alarm folks about what's going on in terms of the increasing severity and frequency of these major weather disasters we're seeing, driven by the changing climate, right? So I feel compelled to make people realize that this is not going away, that this is going to continue to happen over and over again, and that we need to harden ourselves in every possible way and adapt to these increasing disasters.
I mean, John, I have an executive order from, I call him convicted felon Donald Trump. You don't have to do that. From Trump, dated April 8th, 2025. Quote, protecting American energy from state overreach. A commitment to unleashing American energy through the removal of illegitimate impediments to the identification and development of oil, gas, coal, nuclear. Then I have Trump going to the United Nations just last month. At the end of September, stating that climate change is the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in his opinion. This is at the United Nations, where other countries are saying the United States not combating climate change is a, quote, betrayal of the most vulnerable, endangering the lives of innocent people in the world. I've got slashes to the tune of millions of dollars to NOAA, to weather labs and institutes, to geostationary weather satellites, to the human people, the actual people that are there to synthesize this information and data so that it can be sent out in a timely fashion to protect human lives. I get it, John. I understand what you've said. To heck with it. You may call me alarmist, but I'm not. I'm a realist when it comes to why people need to understand the imminent danger that this world is facing because of climate change.
Yeah, listen, I've done a lot of introspection about this, and I've written about it, by the way. I'll invite your viewers and listeners to go to thebulletin.org. This is the publication from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, founded right after the Manhattan Project by Einstein and Oppenheimer, because they were concerned about threats to humanity. Originally nuclear proliferation, but now it includes climate change, right?
Yep.
Climate change is included as a threat to humanity by this organization. And I am proud to be a climate change columnist for them. And twice, I think during the Hurricane Otis column, and during the Hurricane Helene column that I wrote, I've done this introspection. And that's what's happened to me. How can I, in the face of increasing dangers to communities, because let's frame it this way. It seems to me, especially in the United States, where, this whole concept of individualism is taken to the extreme. I think much more than we see in most other countries, not all other countries, but most other countries. Okay, so you want to be individualistic and only care about yourself and only care about perhaps the people that surround you? Let me tell you, these extreme weather events are coming for you. They're coming for you. And that's why I'm no longer not alarmist. I have to make people realize, indeed, like I said in that clip, which was during Hurricane Melissa's coverage, that these extreme weather events are coming for your family and for you and for your household and for your money and for your property, right? And you can't even pay insurance anymore because guess what? Climate change has already come for you, because that's what's driving up prices for insurance, which is unattainable in some locations because of the increasing in wildfires and the increasing strength in hurricanes and so on and so forth. So, it's very important that people realize that this is real. And I don't care whether you are the most individualistic person on the planet, because you lift yourself up by your bootstraps and, government should stay out of my business and don't tread on me. Well, you know what? climate change is already treading on you. And you
I
should
was going to say,
know about this issue.
Mother Nature doesn't care.
It does-
Mother Nature is not going to pick and choose, right? Mother Nature doesn't care.
Correct. And then regarding some of the changes at the federal government level that we've seen, here we are in an era in which weather extremes are increasing, and the changing climate has everything to do with that. So that's the era we're in. It's only going to get worse unless we mitigate, right? Mitigate meaning we cut down on the injection of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is precisely the first couple of things that you mentioned that the administration has decided to quit on, because they're going to burn fossil fuels and in addition, cut out all the efforts and all the funding that was going towards renewable energy. Right? With the only type of alternative energy they're funding is nuclear, which, by the way, I am in favor of that. I know that will not be the most popular opinion, but I think it needs to be a part of our energy mix going forward. Nuclear, but so this is the era we're living in, and yet our ability to study. So let's talk about study. NOAA's labs, right, are proposed to be shut by the fiscal year 2026 budget proposed by the White House. This includes the Hurricane Research Division, where we learn more about these killer storms like Melissa. It includes the National Severe Storms Lab, where we learn how to better warn for the types of flash floods that killed all those girls or all the campers in Texas, right? It includes the stations that monitor carbon dioxide content in the atmosphere, because, if we can't monitor it, then the increase in carbon dioxide isn't really happening, right? Right. So our ability to study these weather extremes is decreasing based on these proposed cuts, and then based on the cuts that already happened. Not just the proposed ones, but the ones that already happened, our ability to monitor the weather is being impacted. We've lost weather balloons all across the U.S. Is there a connection to why the American GFS global forecast model is pathetic, frankly, right now in its ability to forecast? Not exactly sure, because you'd think that some of the other global forecast models would be impacted by the missing balloon data, but certainly the American model is, in the tank right now. So study, monitor, we can't do that anymore. Forecast, I just told you the example. The weather model is degraded. It's not forecasting as well as it used to. And I anticipate that being the case all across the planet right now because of the missing American weather data that's no longer there because of all the cuts to the National Weather Service and to NOAA. We can't study it. We can't monitor it. We can't forecast anymore. Therefore, we cannot warn people against the impending danger and save life and property, right? And then finally, the last element, which you didn't mention, but I'll add here, is our ability to recover, because FEMA has been
slashing FEMA,
slashed and left up to the states, and the states are not going to have the resources to help people after major disasters. So those 5 elements are being impacted in such a way right now that I think it's costing us dearly. It's unnecessary loss of life, and when lives don't get taken but get ruined, the pain is prolonged for much longer than it needs to be.
John Morales, I don't really have the words to express my gratitude for you taking the time to not only spend it with me and my viewers, but to just consistently be a source of knowledge. Even if what you're telling us is not good news, at least you're there in the darkest of times to walk us through this and to be alongside us, because to your point, well taken, it's all coming for all of us, regardless of who we are, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of where you live, whether it's a wildfire, a hurricane, a tornado, a flash flood, it's all coming for us. And so I'm forever grateful and appreciative that you're willing to do this conversation with me and that you continue to be such an incredible advocate for all Americans. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
It was a great conversation. I really appreciate the platform. And we'll continue to do this as long as we can, for sure.
Anytime. You are more than welcome. But thanks again for today. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together. We've got the breaking news that a federal judge in New Hampshire has now entered a nationwide injunction to block Trump's executive order from January 20th of this year that would effectively ban birthright citizenship for a slew of citizens in the United States. So let's tackle what we know so that you can be up to date. So the oral arguments were done today, as in Thursday morning before this federal judge. And the group of plaintiffs in this case were attempting to get not only that nationwide injunction put into place, but also the certification of an entire nationwide class in this lawsuit to be able to move forward against the Trump administration in terms of that executive order. Now, this lawsuit was filed on June 27th, immediately after the United States Supreme Court entered its ruling basically saying that nationwide injunctions were not applicable in certain situations, effectively allowing Trump's executive order to move forward. But you'll also remember that here at the Katie Phang News Channel, we discussed the fact that that decision by the Supreme Court had a 30-day window, a 30-day stay, effectively saying that, hey, if you're going to seek relief from another court, you better do it within that 30-day window. And that is exactly what this group of plaintiffs did. So let's talk about it. Who were the plaintiffs? Well, I'm going to say with pride that Democracy Defenders Fund, of which I am a part, as well as the ACLU and LULAC and other amazing organizations, represented this group of plaintiffs. The proposed class, the one that was the proposed class, included babies that were subjected to this executive order, but it also included more people. It was brought on behalf of pregnant immigrants, as well as immigrant parents and their infants, to be able to be deemed to be this class that needed to be protected from Trump's executive order. Now, the judge in this case did enter that nationwide injunction, but limited it, and we're going to get into the language of that in just a minute. But I wanted you to understand who the group of plaintiffs are so that you understood kind of who was bringing this lawsuit. Now, let's start with specifically the executive order at issue. I want to remind everybody, this executive order was dated January 20th, 2025. It was entitled Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship, which is a bullshit title. And it basically starts with a reiteration of the 14th Amendment. People, this is in our United States Constitution. The 14th Amendment is clear. It states as follows, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Period. End quote. That's it. It's very clear. The language on its face could not be clearer. Now, the executive order from Donald Trump did the following. It basically said, quote, the privilege of U.S. citizenship does not automatically extend to persons born in the United States, one, when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the U.S. and the father was not a United States citizen or a lawful permanent resident at the time of that person's birth, or when that person's mother's presence in the U.S. at the time of their birth was lawful but temporary, for example, visiting the U.S. under a visa waiver or visiting on a student, work, or tourist visa, and the father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of that birth. So those are the particular groups of people that were affected by Trump's executive order. It also says that it would apply only to people who are born within the United States after 30 days from the date of this order. So the date of this order was January 20th. It had that 30-day window, but then the lawsuits ensued until the Supreme Court did on an emergency application what it did a few weeks ago. Now, let's talk about this lawsuit in New Hampshire. As I said, it was brought on behalf of a group of plaintiffs seeking class certification. And the argument that was made was this particular group of people needed to have a class certification achieved, as well as a nationwide injunction to protect them from Trump's executive order as the case is progressing. I will also remind you that the Supreme Court of the United States a couple of weeks ago did not address the substantive issue of whether or not the 14th Amendment was to stand. I always want to remind people because the Supreme Court specifically didn't address that, in large part because the federal government actually didn't address that, because the federal government knows that it's going to lose on this issue of the 14th Amendment. The ruling by the judge, Joseph LaPlante, was made from the bench. What does that mean? That means that at the time when his ruling was entered, he did it orally from the bench, and he said a written order was to come, and we got our copies here of those written orders. But at the time of his ruling, he did it from the bench, meaning that he made the declaration without actually reading from an order or issuing a written order. The government was seeking that the entire class not be certified, one, and two, saying that the class was too broad that was being sought by the plaintiffs in this case. The judge has given a window of 7 days for the government to appeal to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And listen, it's the Trump administration, so we know that's going to happen. And we'll get into the specifics in a minute. But the judge understood that an appeal was going to be coming. But I want to talk about the timing of that vis-a-vis what the Supreme Court said in its own 30-day window, and we're going to kind of see how the machinations turn out here. But of course, remember too, when the United States government was arguing in the what we call the CASA case, right, the one that went to the United States Supreme Court, when they were arguing that CASA case, they basically told the Supreme Court, the government did, that it thought that nationwide classes was the way to go versus nationwide injunctions. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not they are disingenuous in the legal arguments that they advance if they choose to appeal this decision. But as we talked about, that 7-day window that this federal judge just gave the government to be able to appeal, it's still well within that 30-day window that expires July 27th that the Supreme Court gave to basically let people go to court and try to get their nationwide injunctions. So there is protection that's baked in there. So that's some other good news. I want to actually read to you the statement that was given by Tiana Mays, the legal director for Democracy Defenders Fund. She said, "This decision today is a victory for our plaintiffs and millions of families across the country who deserve clarity and stability. The fight to uphold the guarantee of birthright citizenship is far from over, and we will continue to advocate to ensure we keep that promise." Let's dig deeper, please, into the orders that were entered by Judge LaPlante so you can see what the language is that is at stake here that will be the grounds upon which an appeal would be made if the Trump administration does an appeal. Let's start first with the order granting the motion for class-wide preliminary injunction. You know what? Actually, no. Let's start with a provisional class certification so you understand how this came to pass. If you'll remember, class was in session on Substack Live and on YouTube when myself and Steve Vladeck dealt with this issue of classes, like class actions last week, Friday, because we knew it was important for you all to understand how class actions operate. And as we described, there is a Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 23 that if you pull up on their internet and you were to follow along from the internet of Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 23, and you read this order, you'll see that it actually matches the language of that federal rule. So Judge LaPlante grants the motion for provisional class certification and appointment of class counsel. So what does that mean? Provisional means it's obviously, for the time being. And in fact, the order says this certification is provisional, final relief is not granted at this time. That means that we're not all the way to the end of this case. And so right now, the class certification is temporary, which again happens. This is not unusual, just to let you know. The judge in the order then goes on to say that Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 23A and B2 are satisfied. The requirements are satisfied. The plaintiffs have demonstrated that the members of the proposed class are so numerous that joinder is impracticable, meaning that there's so many people that are affected by this executive order that the class certification makes sense. 2, there are questions of law and fact that are common to the class. Again, the idea that commonality is there, that the issues that are at play, not only of law and fact, are satisfied by this proposed class. 3, the claims of the petitioners are typical of the claims of the class members. Again, the claims have that similarity. They are typical of those of the proposed class. And 4, petitioners and their counsel are representatives of the class and will fairly and adequately protect the interests of the class. Meaning the specific people, the plaintiffs in this case that have sued, that they will fairly and adequately protect the interests of the entire class. That again, they may not be before Judge LaPlante in New Hampshire, but when you certify this provisional class, it affords protections to anybody that would fall within this proposed class. So that's the cool thing about a class action and its power and its effect. So the judge grants the motion and provisionally certifies the following class for purposes of the preliminary injunction, that nationwide injunction we're about to talk about, for purposes of that preliminary injunctive relief. All current and future persons who were born on or after February 20th, 2025. Stop. So why is that date important? Remember, this was a January 20th executive order. It had a 30-day window that we talked about here. It'll apply only to persons who are born within the U.S. after 30 days from the date. So that is why Judge LaPlante says this applies to current and future persons, as in babies who are yet to be born, who are born on or after February 20th, 2025. Or those that have already been born since February 20th, 2025, where 1, that person's mother was unlawfully present, ... and 2. So what does that mean? It tracks the language of Trump's executive order. So this provisional class certification are for the members that meet whatever that executive order was going after, and more specifically, the babies. So what does that mean? That means Judge LaPlante did not give class membership to all of the plaintiffs that were being seeking this relief, meaning it wasn't to the adults, it wasn't to the parents, it was to the babies. So that's a distinction here, right? That means that it is a narrowed class than what was originally being sought. Still a win, but still a narrowed class, which is kind of what the government, the Trump administration, was actually arguing. They actually told this judge that the class shouldn't be granted and that it was way too broad. And the judge, in part, agreed with the Trump administration. But again, still a win to get this class certification for this group. Let's move on quickly to the actual order that grants that nationwide injunction. The order says, order granting petitioner's motion for a class-wide preliminary injunction. The court grants petitioner's motion for a class-wide preliminary injunction. The court finds that the petitioners have demonstrated a likelihood of success on the merits of their claims. They are likely to suffer irreparable harm if the order is not granted. The potential harm to the class petitioners if the order is not granted outweighs the potential harm to the government if the order is granted, and the issuance of this order is in the public interest. Now, this is pursuant to Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65A. That's the one that deals with injunctions. And it pretty much blocks a whole list of federal agencies. Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem as the Secretary, Department of State, Secretary Marco Rubio of the Department of State, the Department of Agriculture, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the Administrator for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, in their official capacities are, quote, enjoined and restrained from enforcing the executive order protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship, the one that you and I just walked through. The court requires a nominal bond of $1. So a bond has to be posted by the prevailing party in the injunctive space, but $1 is easily met, which is great, right? That nominal bond means that it satisfies the rule of the civil procedure, a federal rule of civil procedure, but it's not something that's going to be cost prohibitive, which is great. This preliminary injunction is stayed for 7 days pending appeal. We've already walked through this. We know that the judge is giving the Trump administration 7 days to appeal. And it says the certified class has been narrowed by the court from that requested by the petitioners. That's a footnote, and that's what we just talked about. The original class as sought by the plaintiffs was much bigger. It's been narrowed by this judge, which, by the way, makes it more likely to survive an appellate review. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to mention here, right? After this ruling, NBC News went to the Department of Justice to get a statement. And this was what the Department of Justice did. It referred NBC News to a previous statement that was made by Attorney General Pam Bondi last week after a judge in D.C. blocked Trump's asylum ban at the U.S.-Mexico border. This is what the DOJ's response was to what just happened right now in New Hampshire. A rogue district court judge is already trying to circumvent the Supreme Court's recent ruling against nationwide injunctions, end quote. They never learn, do they? There is a slew of federal district court judges and appellate court judges that are telling this administration that they're messing up and that what they're doing is illegal and unconstitutional, but they don't care. And in response, they just call them rogue judges. I mean, it's the lack of respect is one thing. But again, we see continued non-compliance. And so obviously we have to watch what happens very carefully. But what a win. And for your information, the name of this case is Barbara, in quotes, clearly, the name of one of the plaintiffs, Barbara versus Trump, or Barbara versus the United States here. I want to just underscore how important this decision is. We were all wondering what was going to happen post United States Supreme Court's ruling at the end of June concerning nationwide injunctions. There was a lot of uncertainty, and the idea of a class action succeeding was really kind of something we were watching carefully to see if we were going to be able to successfully get across at least the preliminary finish line, the first hurdle. And we've now seen a very smart federal judge say, not only do you get your class certification, but I'm going to enter that nationwide injunction. So this kind of further explains that Supreme Court decision, meaning nationwide injunctions aren't dead. As you recall, the Supreme Court said nationwide injunctions are still available if it provides complete relief, right? If this is an idea that complete relief can only be given through a nationwide injunction. And that's what Amy Coney Barrett underscored in the majority opinion from SCOTUS. So this federal judge says this nationwide injunction is the way to give complete relief, especially to a specific class of people. Folks, we have a class action certified in a birthright citizenship case. We have a nationwide injunction now in a birthright citizenship case. We've got justice and democracy prevailing today. We take our wins where we get them. This is a win for democracy. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. These plaintiffs did. Let's watch this space and let's see what else happens. See you on the other side. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching. One of the incredible things about being in independent journalism is having this platform, this space to have real substantive conversations with experts. And Ruth Ben-Ghiat is the expert on autocracy and fascism and dictatorships. And, when you see her on cable news, it's a 6-minute maybe conversation. And the fact that I got the privilege to hang out with her for 20 minutes today was not only so illuminating for me, but I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. You're going to learn so much from it. I am grateful for just her wisdom and for her willingness to educate us on how not only we have lessons to learn from history, but she also tells us how we can stop this backslide into authoritarianism. Listen to Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And joining me now, I have the privilege of being able to spend time with my friend and somebody who I just admire and respect so much, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She is the president. I just made you a president, Ruth. She's a professor of history. You should be, frankly. You do a much better job. Professor of history and Italian studies at New York University. She's also the author of Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. Ruth, I want to read the description of your book because it's just so on point with so much that we have going on. It's not only obviously a New York Times bestseller, but it examines how illiberal leaders use corruption, violence, propaganda, and machismo to stay in power and how resistance to them has unfolded over a century. Ruth, your book came out in 2020. The paperback version came out with a new epilogue in 2021, but it feels like it's timeless. The theories and the concepts that you cover really are. Before we get into some of the latest coming out of Brazil, though, I wanted to talk to you about these concepts, right? Because I live in Florida. I have lived in Florida since 1983. So I have seen an evolution of our communities here. And I'm always fascinated with this concept of the strongman. It is not a foreign concept to people that live in Central American and South American countries specifically. And I think it's a mindset that travels with them when they come to the United States, which is why I am always hard pressed to want to ask people from Venezuela, people from Brazil, people from Colombia. I mean, people from countries that are used to the strong men leaders. They're used to that mentality. Why are they voting for that here in the United States?
I think it's some of it is familiarity, even though many of those people left their countries because they saw the destruction that the strongman model of leadership creates. Part of it is this lingering idea they were socialized to, that this is when you have crises, whether they're invented or real, it's only the strongmen who can take care of it because they're more efficient. And I wrote Strongmen to debunk these myths, number one, of authoritarian efficiency. And when I've done talks on the book, readers or come up to me if they're from Venezuela or Cuba and ask me why I don't have left-wing leaders in the book other than Gaddafi. And really, it's not that I think they're any better. In fact, if we want to do body counts, communism caused far more deaths than fascism. But I really didn't see, I wrote this during Trump 1.0, and I didn't see any book that looked back and went from the days of fascism and then what happens when fascism ends to right-wing military dictatorships in Latin America and South America, and on to the present with people like Bolsonaro. And I didn't see any history of that. So that's why I chose to structure it that way to lead up to Trump.
You know, one of the further descriptions for you, the work you're doing in the book, is the following. And again, I thought it was pretty captivating in terms of what we are going through right now, or perhaps what we're suffering through. It says, ours is the age of the strong man, of heads of state who damage or destroy democracy, use masculinity as a tool of political legitimacy, and promise law and order rule, and then legitimize lawless behavior by financial, sexual, and other predators. They use propaganda, virility, corruption, and violence to stay in power. But your book is instructive on how they can be opposed. And I am always grateful for solutions, right? Because we can always, misery loves company. We can always commiserate together on the state that we find ourselves in. And I appreciate solutions. But it is remarkably chilling to me, Ruth, that description I just read, not only is it applicable to several, but we're talking about what we have right now. It's not only Trump 1.0, but in Trump 2.0. And on its face, if I read that, you would never want to sign up for that. And yet we are now currently living in exactly that state.
Yeah, well, it's a testament to how good these types of leaders are, or before they become leaders, exploiting times of crisis and transition. Like the first ones, the fascists came to power through, they were appointed to power, but they came up at a time in the ashes of World War I. And so every time there's a sense of transition and crisis, they come, it's a propitious time for these personalities who come up, and they're very good communicators, whether it was Mussolini with newsreels, Hitler with the radio, Trump and Bolsonaro with Twitter. Modi is the most followed leader in the world today. Check out his Instagram. He even has a 3D avatar, animated avatar that shows people how to do yoga because he cares for his people so much. So they're really unbeatable. Democrats, they leave Democrats in the dust, and they promise solutions, and they communicate in innovative ways. And so this has happened over and over again. And Democrats just are not as good at exploiting the moment, at seizing the moment. And that's why people vote over and over again. Now they come to power more by voting for these types of leaders, but it's very discouraging. But we can learn something from the techniques, certainly of messaging, and think about how powerful it would be if we had leaders who were expressing love and care, but they actually meant it instead of trying to just manipulate people as Trump and his cohort do.
So walk me through this analysis in real time, please, because I get criticized often, Ruth, for me underestimating, I'll use that verb, I guess, underestimating Trump in some ways. I don't find him to be particularly intellectual, like book smart. I don't find his street smarts to be that compelling either. His messaging, if you listen carefully, you really don't even have to listen carefully. He doesn't express concern for others. He airs grievances. It's and it's not as if he's inviting others. I will take care of you. It's more, let me sit here and just bitch about how horrible this country is. He does make promises to make it better, Ruth, but like I kind of don't see the parallels between how successful other dictators have been in that regard and these promises, because I feel like Trump just brings out the worst in people and says, well, now I'm giving you the permission structure to join me in complaining about how horrible this place is.
Yeah, but they've all done that. And they all use this idea of victimhood. Mussolini used to talk about being a victim, all the way up to, this crosses left and right boundaries, because and Erdogan talks about victimhood. He did it before he had a coup attempt against him in 2016, but as you can imagine, then he really souped that up. In other countries, it's not just the leader who's the victim, it's the whole country. So that's been true in Russia. They're very deeply rooted ideologies of national victimization at the hands of the West. And the same in China. That's a huge part of communist ideology, is victimization. And we're seeing the real-time effects of this now, because it's being, as I said, it's being done by today's leaders. And they use that to make arguments that whatever they do, whether it's invading Ukraine or other things, is legitimate self-defense because they are victims. They are victimized. So in doing this, Trump has just followed this groove set by other leaders, and he's been very brilliant. I think he's one of the most brilliant propagandists in history, actually. And you don't need book smarts for that. You need communications, savvy, and he had that from television. And it's interesting that a lot of the most successful autocrats come from backgrounds of advertising, like Bukele, or they were journalists like Mobutu and Mussolini, or they were in television like Berlusconi and Trump. So they know how to exploit fears, exploit grievances, while saying, I will take care of you, I alone can fix it.
So I'll push back gently on that, which is, I understand the skill set has provided, maybe a natural entree to be able to sell. It's all in the sale, right? These are salesmen. They're incredibly skilled salesmen to be able to pitch this to people. But and I appreciate your assessment that Trump is a brilliant propagandist. But on its face, though, Trump is unintelligible, though, often, right? I mean, just even, and the stuff that comes out of his mouth, though, even objectively, even though I obviously go in skewed with the lens of disgust for him, even objectively, a lot of times it's babbling, it's unintelligible, it doesn't make any sense. So I kind of feel like, so how does that still work for somebody like Trump, I guess? So
the doctor, the personal doctor of dictator Idi Amin, and I've read a lot of books that are looking at the psychology of these people, said that he was both sane and insane. And he was both calculating, very logical in how he went about his repression, and also completely capricious and impulsive. And I'll give an example that your viewers can think of some parallels. That Idi Amin he was dictator of Uganda. He had a dream that told him he should kick all of the South Asian community out of Uganda. So the next day, because he's a dictator, he does it. All his advisors are like, no, they are the backbone of business and commerce. This will be ruinous. Doesn't care. So he kicked them all out. He gave them, I don't know, like whatever, 60, 90 days to leave. And indeed, it tanked the economy. And he had to invite them back. So the one thing that we find is that because they have these propaganda machines that tell us how successful they are, my new research is building on what I had in Strongman, saying that they're actually becoming way more weaker because the toll of their capricious and impulsive things that we can think of, Trump and the tariffs, is harder to hide. And so if we look around, you know how Xi Jinping, he had like a convocation of all the leaders for his military parade. Well, if you think about the people who were there, Modi, he lost his parliamentary majority. Orban now has a major challenger of Peter Magyar. Look what's happened to Bolsonaro, who has been out of office, but that's for his whole cause. Putin is riding high with his approval rating, but Russia's become an economic client of China. People don't really know this, but it's completely dependent economically on China. And even Xi Jinping the economic downturn has forced him he's lost a lot of legitimacy, which is why he's becoming more repressive. So autocrats are not doing that well, and that's also why they're becoming more aggressive, and they're working together more because individually they're weaker.
And which is why the United States, as you and I have talked about, has become a haven for those that are international criminals. Let's talk about Bolsonaro, because the former president of Brazil, from January of 2019 to December of 2022, was just sentenced to 27 years in jail after having been convicted for plotting a coup. Now, this is Jair Bolsonaro. And, just the last 24 hours, the United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has now announced sanctions on the wife of Brazil's Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who presided over Bolsonaro's trial. That justice himself says the sanctions against his wife were illegal and regrettable, but they're not taking it lying down as in Brazil, because they have now also said that they are charging the son of former President Jair Bolsonaro. The son's name is Eduardo. He's hiding out here in the United States. They have now charged him with the crime of coercion because he repeatedly acted to subject the interests of the republic to personal and family agendas. I mean, Ruth, we could just plug and play the Trump family for the Bolsonaro family, but we have to give credit where it's due that Brazil said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow coups against our governments.
And if we look at Brazil's history, there's a really good reason why they took such a different path from the United States. They had a military coup in 1964 that led to over 20 years of horrible dictatorship with people disappeared, torture. And the political class in charge now, including Lula da Silva, were alive because it only ended in 1985. Very recent. So they know very well the toll of not holding people accountable. And new research by political scientists on how do you stop democratic backsliding? How do you stop this drift into authoritarianism? One of the biggest things is this kind of gatekeeping and accountability, all the things we didn't do, right, in the United States. So they have proceeded, not only did they immediately take a very wide frame at prosecuting people involved in the January 2023 insurrection in Brazil, and this was a copycat of January 6th.
That's right.
And Steve Bannon, Jason Miller met with Brazilian officials to kind of school them on this. And who is the big liaison between the Brazilians and the Americans? It's Eduardo Bolsonaro, the son who was just charged. He was at the White House on January 5th, meeting with Jared Kushner and Ivanka, but he was there the day before our coup attempt. And so there's a long history. And so then when Bolsonaro was there was, threats to imprison him and charge him, or convict him, and have a long sentence. Eduardo actually came to the United States to lobby for retaliation of America. And this is all what we call personalist rule, where for a certain type of autocrat, policy becomes a personal affair, and the priorities of the family are supposed to dictate foreign and domestic policy. And what we're seeing here, and this is why the Brazilians are striking at Eduardo too, is an example of that.
Yeah, and I thought it was great that the current president of Brazil did an op-ed in the New York Times on September 14th in the wake of the conviction of the former president Jair Bolsonaro. And he said, the current president said, "I am proud of the Brazilian Supreme Court for its historic decision on Thursday," this was a couple of weeks ago, "which safeguards our institutions and the democratic rule of law. This was not a witch hunt. The judgment was the result of proceedings carried out in accordance with Brazil's 1988 constitution," to your point, "enacted after 2 decades of struggle against a military dictatorship. It followed months of investigations that uncovered plans to assassinate me, the vice president, and a Supreme Court justice. Authorities also discovered a draft decree that would have effectively annulled the 2022 election results." I mean, Ruth, it gives me the chills because the parallels are so profound between us and January 6th and our insurrection in 2021, and obviously what happened in 2023 in Brazil. But to have the strength and the wisdom and the judgment of a president of a country that has gone through so much turmoil economically and politically, but for him to remind all of us that the safeguarding of our institutions and the democratic rule of law is something that goes beyond and above personal gain. I mean, it is obviously something that we want to have here in the United States. So Ruth, again, we love to have solutions here. How do we regain our footing? This has only been 8 months of a Trump term 2.0. And, several of us feel like we're kind of on our back heels right now.
Well, there's a good reason for this. And in my estimation, having studied so many, dictatorships, how they get started, what we are living through in the United States is very rare, actually. The pace of change, both foreign policy and domestic aggressions, does not resemble other autocrats today who came to power via election. If you look at the first 9 months of Putin or Orban or others, they did not proceed so quickly. And even those who had been in power before and came back, they did not proceed so quickly. And so the pace of change we're living through is more like when people come to power via coup, or even Anne Applebaum has rightly compared it to like a foreign occupation. So where they go immediately. Now, they were able to do this because they were in power before, Trump 1.0, and also there's going to be books written about this, use their time out of power brilliantly. And the state of Trump's personality cult, it's very difficult to keep a personality cult so robust when you're out of power that some people, because they had the election denial, some people thought that he was always the rightful president. And they even had like a shadow government in the form of the Heritage Foundation, which was doing Project 2025.
Gotcha.
And Orban legitimized this whole state of affairs when he came to the States 2 times during Biden's presidency. He refused to meet with Biden. He never went to the White House, Orban, which is a total breach of protocol. Where did he go? He went to Mar-a-Lago to see the pretend rightful heir of the presidency, Trump, and he went to the Heritage Foundation. So they used their time out of power really well, and they were planning all of this. So it wasn't only Project 2025. We all spread the alarm about, right, on television and elsewhere. And so they hit the ground ready. And that's why, as you said, we feel like we're taken aback now. So what can we do? We have to use one of my maxims is you use every tool and space you have at your disposal when you're resisting. And so everybody can find a way to push back that they're comfortable with. Some people will be in the streets. We've just seen the power of economic boycotts and consumers in getting Disney and ABC to bring Jimmy Kimmel back.
Yep.
So there are many, many ways that we can resist, and none of it is futile. That's the message.
And I feel almost validated because you and I obviously have not coordinated this, but I have been saying that people need to be engaged, but they shouldn't be judged for their level of engagement. Your level, your engagement can look different. Perhaps you're not comfortable going to the streets, but perhaps you are comfortable doing a book club or a writing campaign or something of that ilk. But just being engaged counts. And that we are not here to judge what you are doing as long as you're doing something in the defense of and in the advancement of democracy. And so I feel if somebody as smart as you, Ruth, is saying that that makes sense, and I feel, like I said, a little validated. Ruth, where can people follow you? You have an exceptional Substack. I feel spoiled that we've had the privilege of your time this way. This is one of the luxuries I think independent media affords, that you and I could spend more time than just 5 minutes on a quick hit, right, on cable TV.
Yeah.
Where can people not only continue to read what you're doing, but also follow you so that they can get smarter?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I have a Substack called Lucid, as in clear thinking. And that's where I'm actually doing almost all of my writing and thinking these days on Brazil, on the United States, and on how we can understand autocracy and democracy better. So Lucid, you can sign up, and I have weekly Q&As for paying subscribers where you can ask me questions. I'm also on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on X, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. So that's where to find me.
Well, Ruth, I will underscore, this is probably one of my favorite conversations that I've ever had. You bless me and others with your wisdom and your just this, the depth of your historical insight. I mean, it's pretty overwhelming because there are lessons from which we can learn if we're paying attention and if we're being honest about assessing the role of history and where we find ourselves now. So Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thank you for the privilege, truly the privilege of your time today.
Thank you, Katie. It's been a delight.
Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.